Thank you, everybody. It's really an honor to be here. My deep appreciation to John, to Marnie, to Suzanne, to all the folks at UB, Launch New York, the State of New York, the major sponsors. Superior Group has been a fantastic supporter of this. It's been such an exciting experience to come here and see Buffalo, and I've been doing some homework. I've been reading about Buffalo and learning about this amazing city. And this image of the door is something that we use a lot in our work, and I think it's particularly interesting and apt for the situation in Buffalo, because so many people in Buffalo are wondering, how do you get through this door? How do you get from the place we're in right now to the place we're trying to get to? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some insights on ecosystems and innovation systemically as a whole, across entire cities or communities. And then we're also going to ask you to do a little bit of work at the end as well. We're not going to make you do too much work. We did that yesterday. We had a whole 3-hour-plus session with about 70 people in the community to help design some of the core aspects of the ecosystem. But today we'll get you to do a little bit of stuff too. So pay attention, because you're going to have to use these ideas later. I don't know if there's a clicker here. Oh, here we go. There we go. So one thing I want you to start with is just this. So think about one word that's the key to unlocking innovation. So all of us have ideas on innovation and technologies. And so what I want to do is to ask you to think about one word. Can you reduce everything down to one word? And at the end, we'll quiz you. We'll see if you got it right. So this might date some of us, but this is Walter Cronkite. So back in the 70s, and you know, I grew up with Walter Cronkite. He was the host of the CBS Evening News. And whereas a lot of families would get home over dinner, they'd talk about, you know, what they did that day, or the family news, my family just turned on the TV. It probably wasn't the best parenting decision, but we just turned on the TV. And we'd watch the news every single night. And so starting as a young boy, all of us sitting around the dinner table, I started to get this exposure to the world. And I grew up everywhere. I was born in Louisiana, which is not people's first guess, then Iowa, Indiana, and then Texas, but my family was originally from Taiwan, and before that from China. And so I always had this sense of place. And so being a young child, I'd always ask these questions. Why are some places better than others economically? Why do some places thrive and other places fall behind? And as I moved around, I'd see the differences of these communities. And so eventually, when I got to California and I got to Silicon Valley, I saw a different kind of culture and environment, and I could start to compare and contrast. It wasn't as if one place was better or worse than another. It's just that they were different. And those differences led to different results across an entire community. And when I started to realize how this worked, and I started to piece these dots together, I had this a sense of mission. I said, you know, the world doesn't know this, and I've got to share this. This is too important. It's too important to connect these ideas of what makes a place tick the way it ticks and what makes a place productive and innovative. So that's what I'm here to share with you today. So I want to start by, instead of talking about Silicon Valley, to talk about Kansas. I'd like you to meet Susan and John Gouch. So starting in 1994, Susan and John Gouch at the University of Kansas received a $15,000 grant to build what they called Jayhawk Search. It was a meta search engine. For those of you geeks in the web space, you know what meta search means. But for the rest of you, meta search is a search engine of search engines. So they would go out there and they'd compile all the other search engines out there, and they'd get the best results of them. They had developed an algorithm, being some of the leading computer scientists of their time in this field, for developing the best search tool available. By 1995, it was actually a big success. They originally thought it was just kind of a cool experiment. But by 95, they had 300,000 users per month. They had to move it to a dedicated server, and they said, why not? Let's start a company. And they called it Profusion. By 1996, they had 1 million users per month. So this thing was really starting to cook. And if you remember, the internet, at least the World Wide Web at least, was really just starting to get going at that point. And by 1997, PC Magazine, if you remember what a magazine is, PC Magazine named Profusion the meta search engine of the year. They called it, so the leading computing magazine of its era called it the leading search engine of its time in the world at that moment. So 1997 was that technical achievement, the milestone for Profusion. They were at the top of the game. In 1998, they tried to grow. So they started to go and enter into some strategic partnerships. They recruited business management. They tried to do what all the companies here are trying to do today. They tried to do the stuff you need to do to build a business. From 1999 and on, it became a failure. This company didn't make it. By the time it was done, they earned a total of $100,000 from this company. And according to them, if you ask them, they'll say, well, it worked out to probably less than minimum wage, if you think about it, if you take in all the hours they'd sunk into this thing by the time it was done. So it's an interesting lesson, right? The best mousetrap in the world, the best invention in the world at its time, didn't make it as a business. So what are the lessons of the anti-Google? In fact, as Susan told me, somewhere around 95, 96, a little company called Google was starting up, and they called up the Gouches and said, hey, can you guys drive traffic to our website? We could use some of your help. But what are the lessons here? When something that had the potential to become a Google in the middle of the country in Kansas, at a great research university, what are the lessons for that for everything else? So to answer this question, it's a complex question. So we're going to step back and we're going to look at the whole system. Let's look at what causes companies like this to fail and others to succeed. So the urgent message of the new economy is basically this, which is that what got you here won't get you there. And this is particularly resonant in places like Buffalo, which just a few decades ago were really at the top of the world as well. They were the leading places like Buffalo were really, the leading lights. People across the world looked to it as a source for inspiration. And the interesting thing, when you try to look about how do you get to the future place, how'd you get here and how do you get there? The answer is ultimately about reinventing the role of yourself in the new economy. And I'll explain what this means, and I'll tell you more about what you can do about it. So let's start and ask, how did we end up here? Let's start, in fact, by looking at Buffalo. So this, of course, is Lackawanna Steel, then became Bethlehem Steel, and now has been totally torn down, not that long ago. And what's interesting is the same framework, the same economic model that created this great success for Buffalo is in fact the same prison that actually locks Buffalo up today. If you look at, this is a quote from John Milburn, who was the preeminent, I guess, patron of the city. He was the person who chaired the exposition that was here. And he said in 1898, when they were trying to convince Lackawanna to open its plant here and move from Scranton, they said Buffalo possessed all the necessary conditions and ingredients for the creation of a new economy rooted firmly in industry, natural resources, power, and labor. Each of them, he said, were cheap and inexhaustible. So over 100 years ago, this looked like it was quite prescient. And now looking back 100 years later, it looks like it probably was dated. And the question is, what happened? What happened to this economic model? Because he said this would never end. He said this was bound to be indefinite going into the future. So something changed between then and now. The interesting thing about this model of how we think of production and economics is that we didn't just do it in business. We did it in all other aspects of economic life. So this building is Boston City Hall. And if this building could talk, what would it say to you? Stable, strong, secure, powerful. We know what we're doing. And it was this idea that the institutions of our day, things like City Hall, our big corporations, it was from leaders who knew what they were doing. They were smart, they had good judgment, and they could make decisions on behalf of entire vast populations that would be productive. And this got embodied in this architecture. So in the early 70s, this building was built, and it won a bunch of awards of its time for being an epitome of modern art, modern architecture. The problem with Boston City Hall is that people kind of hate it. It's kind of ugly. And for all the great things it said, the reason they hate it is because of this. Because individuals are minuscule compared to the building. The building basically said, you didn't matter. The decisions are being made by the people on top, and they're going to take care of you. They're going to make the world better because they know what they're doing. But people feel irrelevant to this. You feel like a little ant next to this. And it wasn't just the buildings that were designed like this, it was entire cities. So when you think of Manhattan, when Robert Moses in the 1950s decided that he wanted to move things around efficiently, he wanted to design Manhattan to be the best transport of people and goods all through. And he said, well, how do we move stuff from the bottom of Manhattan to the top of Manhattan? He said, well, we'll just build a highway all up along the riverfront. So East River Drive, which exists today, became a way to move stuff around. And they thought it would be efficient, although people who drive there today might disagree. But that was the nature of the way we designed entire cities and communities. The problem with this, of course, is that people kind of hate it too. And the reason is because it destroys the beachfront. It destroys the waterfront. There's nowhere to take your family for a stroll. There's nowhere to go for a run. There's no cafes along the waterfront. And what it basically said was, you're irrelevant too. The needs of individuals are irrelevant to the fact that the system needs to move things around really efficiently. And so we look at places like this and we think, yeah, it would have been nice to have a waterfront. Even though I guess it's useful to have a road there, we're losing something as human beings. And this is very similar to what happened here in Buffalo when they took the Humboldt Parkway, which I understand is part of the deep nostalgic lore of the Buffalo community, and they replaced it with the Kensington Expressway. This street that had so much human vitality to it and had such a deep emotional resonance for people was obliterated in the service of moving things around efficiently. So this is a modernist view that didn't just apply to how we think of companies or production, it also applied to cities and buildings and everything else we do. What's happened now is that this view has shifted. It's shifted dramatically in the last few decades. It's what we call the evolution of design thinking. And what design means, it's about the interaction of everything, that everything in a system matters. The individuals matter, and the user experience of how people relate to something has a big effect on the productivity of the system. And so what's changed is industrial design has changed. So when we design objects like this clicker, how we make it, how we shape it, do we make it more intuitive? This one probably could have been a little more intuitive than it is. But everything, all the cups and the plates, there's a lot more attention paid to these days in terms of how it interacts with the environment around itself. It also applies to buildings. Architecture has changed. So now we think of buildings not just in terms of their practical utility, but we think of their emotional impact on people. Buildings like this, some of the beautiful buildings here in downtown Buffalo have an emotional resonance that you really can't, you can't put a price on it. You can't put it into words, but it changes the way you behave. It changes the way people interact. It has a powerful effect on systems. And then we look at cities. How we design cities now has changed. There's a lot of emphasis now on the view from the street, the size of sidewalks and how it affects pedestrian life. The use of waterfronts in places like Buffalo. Is that a place where communities come together, or does it feel off limits, like some sort of demilitarized zone? The question then is, how do we shift this whole perspective now to entire economies? How do we now think of ecosystems like this as well? So how do we design the economic communities in which we operate? And how do we build environments so that companies like Profusion and the Gouches don't have companies fail? Because that company should have had everything going for it, but it still ended up not succeeding. So what do we do differently about designing our economic life? The greatest challenge, though, with ecosystems is that they're invisible. You can't see them and you can't touch them. And so how do we build what we call the invisible infrastructure of your innovation community? Ecosystems are invisible, but they're so powerful and they affect everything we do. So let's talk about ecosystems. The world really is looking for a new way to think of economic life. So if you go all the way back to 1776 and Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, they basically said, well, it's basically just the things themselves. All you need is assets. You just need stuff. And if you make lots of stuff and you build lots of stuff, the world will create wealth. And then in 1871, they said, as long as you can trade this stuff back and forth, you create supply and demand, and that evens out, and that's good. And that the trade and the balance of stuff is good. In 1990, they said, well, just put a bunch of stuff close together, clusters. As long as you shove everything close together, it'll all work out, and you'll have wealth. We've tried all these things now. Places like Buffalo have thought of all these things. Places like all of upstate New York have thought of all these things. But they're still looking for something else because it doesn't seem to be enough. And the reason it doesn't seem to be enough is because the model changed. In the past, we thought about production, assembly lines, precision, control. You know everything about everybody and every piece of equipment within an assembly line because that's how you make money. You buy it as cheaply as you can and you sell it as high as you can. And this isn't just for tangible goods, this also applies, this isn't just for goods in the past, it's also for goods in the present. This is how you make cell phones today. And it's not just for tangible goods, it's also for intangible goods. How we run call centers, how we do computer programming is based off of this precision model. What we're talking about today then is how do you create a new paradigm for innovation? And it's the difference between a production model and an innovation model. We call it the difference between a plantation and a rainforest. In a plantation, which is a farm, you know exactly what you want to create. You know you want to create corn, and you try to create that corn, you try to make as much corn as you can and sell it for as high a price as possible for making it as cheaply as you can. It's that simple. In rainforests, however, these systems are uncontrolled. They're random systems where you don't know what you're trying to create. And so when you think of companies like Facebook, 8 years ago, you couldn't have controlled the production of a Facebook. Even if you wanted to. The smartest people in the world couldn't have figured out how you want to build a Facebook. But the environments that cause these things to emerge are what are critical. So if you have a weed in a farm, what do you do to a weed? You kill it. But if you're in a rainforest, what do you do to the weed? Well, Facebook was a weed. You want to nurture it because that weed could become the most valuable plant or tree in the entire rainforest. So the weeds, the random things that don't look like they're very valuable can become the things that become extremely valuable for the whole community. So this is a very different model of how you build systems and how you run communities because it says that you can't control the output of these systems anymore, but you can create environments that cause them to be useful and productive. And so you have this interesting paradox because while plants are harvested efficiently on farms, weeds sprout best in rainforests. And a very good example is this iPhone device. So you think of the production of this device, it's highly controlled. You wouldn't want your phone to be a little more creative than the other ones because the assembly line worker decided to move the buttons around, right? You want your phone to do exactly what the other phones do. That's production. But the design of this, the new operating system that Apple just came out with, that's design. And when they sat down to say, what's the new operating system look like, they didn't quite know what it was going to look like. They had to figure it out because they knew what the problem was, sort of, and then they had to figure out how to solve that problem. So it's abstract, it's indeterminate. And rainforests are successful not because they can predict everything, but because they nurture serendipity. Serendipity is a very American word, and serendipity basically means good accidents. It's the string of good accidents that led to the success of Facebook today. In fact, every successful company ever in the history of humankind was a string of successful accidents. And so to have a string of successful accidents, what do you need? You need environments that nurture serendipity. You need environments that cause these interactions. So it's not just having the stuff. It's not just having the people and the universities and the research and the governments. It's their interactions between them, and particularly the interactions of the people inside these systems. And this requires a big shift in perspective of how we think of economies. It's not just the stuff. It's not just land, labor, capital, and technology going into a big black box. It's about the opening of that box. When we open the box, we find the real world, which is that human beings are in control of the stuff. The land, labor, capital, and technology have real people that decide what to do with them. And in that black box, there are people talking, building companies together, trading, interacting, and it's what they do together that causes the output. So individuals actually matter a lot in economic production when it comes to innovation. And real human beings are separated. And this goes to the heart of why ecosystems don't thrive. Because real human beings are separated by geography, by culture, by language, by social network failures, and by lack of trust. The walls between us are high. You think of all the things that you know and you want to share with the community and that you intend well for others in the community, and how little of that, a trickle, a stream, makes it out of you into the community. So that's really the challenge, is these walls are high. And it's not just in small teams or even small communities. This is across entire cities, entire regions, entire countries. It's the human condition. Most of what we have and we know and want to do is so limited because these walls are high. So when you think of innovation ecosystems, think of the opposite, which is the walls, and all the walls that separate us from working together to build new and creative things. So the secret of innovation ecosystems is actually really simple. It's basically this, which is that economies thrive when culture overcomes these social barriers and fosters connectivity, trust, and collaboration between diverse people. It's that simple in concept. The walls need to come down. And when the walls come down, we find systems thrive. And when you look at places like Silicon Valley, and I've been studying Silicon Valley and ecosystems like this for a long time, the culture is ultimately what drives the production of the system. And when you think about that, it says that you matter, which is a profoundly different notion from what economics has been for a long time. When they built Lackawanna Steel, the answer was, you don't matter except as someone we hire as a fungible commodity to work in the assembly process. But in the new economy, in the innovation economy, you absolutely do matter. Everything you know and you do and you can create and you can share together actually matters to the quality of the community around you. And when you look at these environments, you try to dig down a little deeper and you try to understand what makes them tick. What is it about you that causes this to happen? It's what we call an unwritten social contract. Every community has its own social contract. And there are these unspoken rules about what you can do and what you can't do. Innovation has its own social contract, and it can be boiled down to 7 things. We've looked for any other things, and we haven't really found them. These are the 7 that seem absolutely critical. 1, you break rules and dream. That is, you're not bound by precedent. You try to do new things, and you try to have new visions of what's possible. 2, you open doors and listen. You're willing to seek diverse ideas and opinions and people, and actually care about what they're saying. You never know if you're going to be sitting down to that college dropout that builds the next Facebook. Just because he's a 20-year-old college dropout doesn't mean you don't pay attention. This willingness to be attentive to people because it just might be important. 3, trust and be trusted. This sounds easy, but it's not, because it actually means that you trust first. You give trust to someone before you receive it in return. And this is counter to much of human instinct. Much of human instinct is to be resistant to somebody until they've demonstrated some reason to trust them. But in the Valley, what you found is that people just trust. I talked to a veteran venture capitalist I know well, and I asked him, had people violated his trust? And he said he had 2 deals that went south because someone screwed him. But he said that was 2 deals out of his entire career. And so he lost money on those 2 deals, but he more than made up for it with all his other deals. So as a portfolio approach, trusting first actually makes a lot of sense. 4, experiment and iterate together. You don't know the answer in advance, but you can experiment as you get closer and closer to the answer. So by working together with people, you can iterate until you get closer to something that's useful. 5, seek fairness, not advantage. So it's not just trying to win all the time. And we think of business, we often say, well, business is about winning, it's competition. But in the early part of innovation, it's more than that. It's about fairness. Because if someone thinks you're going to beat them, they're not going to work with you. Or if someone thinks you're going to beat them, they're not going to work with you. And innovation often takes a long time. I started a company which took a couple of years before the company actually got launched. But it was just assembling the people and the ideas together, piece by piece. And unless everybody believed that they were going to get treated fairly, they wouldn't have started in that journey in the first place. 6, you err and you fail and you persist. That is, you understand that you will keep making mistakes and that it's okay, and you'll fail along the way. I've failed, my companies have failed, and you keep on going. You pick yourself up and you think, well, that's just part of the process. And 7, you pay it forward. This is the idea that you're not just reciprocating favors with people you already know, which is what most of life is. Most of life is you know people and you trade favors back and forth. If you pay it forward, it means someone does you a favor and you pay it back to someone else. And you think about what this does, is it changes favors from a form of barter exchange into a currency. So it makes favors free-flowing. Suddenly people are starting to help each other out because they realize it all comes back around in the end, even though they stop counting. And Silicon Valley, a lot of people don't believe it, but it actually works like this. People just help you with the understanding that at some point you'll help someone else, and that it all comes back around in a giant circle. And when you take these ideas and you think about, well, what do we do? It actually shapes the way you start to learn, and you teach, and you do things. So this is a class at Stanford that's been around for about 30 years, Mechanical Engineering 310. We know the people that do this class quite well. And this is a class that embodies these principles, and it teaches students from the very beginning, not just how to think it, but how to do it. And we know that ecosystems are built by practice, not just by talking. You actually have to engage in the process of learning these behaviors until you get that light that goes on in your head and says, oh, aha, that's how it works. I can talk to you all you want with these ideas, but until you start to practice them, you won't really internalize them, because that's not how human beings work. Human beings don't just decide to change their minds and act differently. It takes time. It takes iteration. So you can embody these behaviors into classrooms. So you look at this place, and it's just, the class is just a mess. And they do it because they're trying to encourage people to make mistakes. If you're in a really nice place, you're afraid of doing things. It just kind of makes you freeze up. So changing the environment actually changes the way people behave, and changing the way you teach changes the way people create. Incidentally, elementary schools in Silicon Valley are using these models now. My third grader is being taught by the same people and the same body of ideas that caused this class to be developed. And so third graders now in Silicon Valley are being taught how to interview people in the community to understand the problems in the community and the needs, and to start building robots to solve community problems. Now, it's probably not quite commercializable in third grade, but the potential of thinking that way and causing people to create differently is quite profound. So you thought of a word earlier here that's the key to unlocking innovation. So I'm going to give you 3 words that I think are the key to unlocking innovation, and see if it matches up. But everyone's got their own version of this, and everyone's got their own answers. So 1, fear. Fear is a big driver of what keeps innovation ecosystems from thriving. It's what is a big driver of what keeps you from doing what you'd like to create. All the things you want to share and do are inhibited not just by your own fear, your own limitations, but by the fear of those around you as well. Fear of how you could harm them. Fear of what it would be like on the other side after you walk through that door. The fear of randomness, the fear of unpredictability. It's a deep one. It's very profound. The opposite of that is arguably trust. So when you have lots of trust, then people aren't afraid, because people are willing to say, all right, I'm maybe a little afraid, but I know that you're not going to hurt me, or you're not going to say bad things about me, or the community's not going to scorn me, because they trust that I'm doing the best I can. And that we're all working together to actually make this real. So trust and fear are 2 of those words. And the third word, I'd argue, is love. Because love is this willingness to reach outside yourself and do something bigger than yourself. And if you talk to most entrepreneurs, if not almost every entrepreneur, not just in the Valley, but anywhere, any entrepreneur that's really tried to do something ambitious, there was a strong element of love behind it. Because building a company by itself doesn't make a lot of sense when you can just take a safe and secure job somewhere else. There's a lot of talented people that give up stable employment to build really innovative things. And so love takes away fear, and it builds trust. So love is also a very key word. So those are the 3, fear, trust, and love. And ultimately, rainforests thrive by nurturing what makes us uniquely human. So a lot of stuff I'm saying here, if you really look inside yourself, you know it's already there. You kind of know that this is at the heart of creation. How we activate that in the community is actually the next step. And so we'll get you to do this in just a bit. It's about these human qualities of happiness, what give us joy. Because innovation is very hard. Building companies is very hard. Creating products is very hard. If it doesn't give you joy and make you happy, you're probably not going to do it. It's just not worth it. It's also about sadness, the stuff that makes us unhappy, because these are the burdens we carry, and how we bounce back from them. Do we have environments of people that give us support and give us nurturing when we're down? These are critical to the process as well, because in most situations, you get hit once and people give up. It's just too hard. So how do you give people environments so that they can overcome this? And again, love. The willingness to reach outside yourself, to care about other people, drives the process too. I have not met someone involved in building a really cool company that had the opportunity to change the world that wasn't motivated by some sense of this, some sense that this is bigger than just me. And any 2 people can do this. So when Larry Page and Sergey Brin met on the first day, they were assigned to each other on the first day of orientation at Stanford as students together. And they decided to build the company together eventually. And it's this idea that how 2 people interact causes the system to function. It's multiplied millions of times. It's like a little fractal equation that changes everything. The little micro instances of behavior actually have a shape on the community. And so when we go back to the beginning of this conversation, we think of economic life and how we produce in societies. The economists have said for a long time that you were just kind of an asset. You were a commodity that didn't matter. But when you look at innovation, you realize individuals do matter. Individuals matter a lot because they can do a lot. When we think of communities and we think of Humboldt Parkway and the fact that that was knocked down, and we think of New York again, we realize that certain communities didn't meet the same fate as Humboldt. Greenwich Village was almost knocked down as well. Robert Moses wanted to put a highway through Greenwich Village to connect the east coast and the west coast of Manhattan. And there's a big fight because people said, you know, we don't think that economic model really works. We believe in our community. We believe in everything that a community offers. And the relationships between people and community in places like Greenwich Village actually matter. So they were able to preserve the creative heart of New York because they rejected this modernist model that said you really didn't matter as an individual. And it's a new way of looking at systems, which is that individuals, the micro, actually shapes the macro, instead of the macro making decisions all by itself. And so you see what's happened in Greenwich Village today, and it's spread now. It's not just Greenwich Village. The creative heart is actually spread throughout all of Lower Manhattan. So silly things like trust and dreams and love, they actually power the world. And this is different. This is a new paradigm. And this has been the mission that I've been on, which is to share this new paradigm, because it's a fundamentally different direction than the way the world had been thinking about economic development for a long time. So now it's time for a little fun. We've walked through the door, and we've got to see the rainforest. So I'm going to give you all a little project. So you're all at tables, and I'm going to ask you to do a few things. One, at your table, pick a facilitator and a scribe. So facilitator, the job of the facilitator is to make sure that everyone gets to talk. And particularly I'm talking to you men, because men like to dominate conversations over women, okay? They don't even, it's not intentional. I know, we don't do it on purpose, guys, but we do it. Let's be honest, right? So pay attention, pick a facilitator and make sure they spread the conversation around. Two, a scribe. And a scribe will be the one person at the table that knows how to use Twitter. I assume there's a few folks that might know how to use Twitter, but pick one person that knows how to use Twitter. Two, share who you are and what drives you. What makes you tick as a human being? Don't go too long, because there's a lot of people at the table, but just share, you know, a few thoughts about what drives you. Three, as a group, create 3 tweets. Okay, 3 tweets. And these tweets are simply this. What are the best weeds in Buffalo we can nurture to grow together? So what are the little things that are sprouting right now in this innovation ecosystem that you think this community can work on? So 10 people, roughly, have to create 3 tweets, okay? So you've all suddenly become little startup companies, and the product you have to create in the next, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes, is to create 3 tweets. That doesn't sound too hard, right? Now, just to show you that it's not too hard, I went and did it earlier. So I just did this morning. So I want you to use these 2 hashtags. One is BBN13, which is for the event, and the other is MyBuffaloIs. And when I did it, I didn't realize that we were using BBN13, so excuse me. But I tweeted these 3 things this morning. So MyBuffaloIs, the emerging leadership of citizens creating the new invisible infrastructure of the Buffalo innovation ecosystem. MyBuffaloIs, the strong diaspora network of people who believe in Buffalo and can help connect it to new markets and partners worldwide. And MyBuffaloIs, the world-leading research at University of Buffalo and its potential applications to transform the world. And you use this format, so MyBuffaloIs and what you think you want to do. Sound good? You can do this? All right, so each of you is now in a new startup company, and you now have a task to do, okay? Thank you all. This has been a great pleasure, and I look forward to seeing this. And the one thing we're going to do is we're going to take all the tweets. So there's like 27 tables here, like 27 tables roughly, 28. Each of you will have 3 tweets. So we're going to have like 80, 90 tweets on the Buffalo ecosystem. We're going to collect all of them, and we're going to create like a portrait with them. We're going to do something. We're going to do something with all these tweets, okay? All right, go at it. Thank you, everybody.